Is there such a thing as an innocent mistake? I don't know, for those of you who haven't heard the term before, it's a mistake that people say, no harm, no foul, didn't mean to. I think there's two ways to look at it. One is that mistakes, why are they made? How do they happen, right? So it's like the cartoons we watch as kids. So, sometimes the bad guy, right? He's working as a waiter, he spills some water on the ground, so the good guy will trip on it. That's a not an innocent mistake, a malicious mistake, if you will. Evil mistake. But the other side is what actually ends up happening. So, like Inspector Gadget, all sorts of bad stuff happens to him, but nothing actually bad happens to it. So a mistake may not carry through and have an actual consequence. I'm thinking on the topic because today, I was dealing with the airline. I asked to add a middle name ticket. They did, and somehow now made a mistake in my wife's first name. So you're like, how did that happen? Obviously, it is a mistake if you want to put it that way. But it's a mistake. They took responsibility. They're going to fix it. I guess the question is, what do we do about mistakes? Do we classify them as innocent or malevolent or malicious? Is that important? Because in a medical field, we don't. It doesn't matter why you made a mistake. It's a mistake. If it has consequences, it's consequences, right? You could say the nurse was well-meaning, but there was too many patients and gave the wrong medication. I mean, that's an innocent mistake, but I don't think anybody uses the term innocent mistake, right? Because the other thing is, when they do stuff on purpose, it's just simply not a mistake. Like when they try to poison people, that's just not a mistake, right? So, is it useful to classify things as innocent mistakes? I would argue that it's actually not. And the idea of innocent mistake is just bad because you're absolving somebody of blame, right? The magnitude of the mistake is the consequence, not why somebody did it. So, did you know that Social Security wrongly classifies many people as dead every year? Some reporter pinned them down. They said some figure, some small fraction, and they calculated. So it's like thousands, maybe low tens of thousands, 20,000. That's a lot of people. I mean, I don't think anybody means to do it. It's just that you get one number off and you have a wrong person, right? And they don't catch those errors. Every now and then, some person on the airplane gets on without their boarding pass being scanned or gets on the wrong flight. I don't think anybody means to. You could say they're all innocent mistakes, but it doesn't matter. Somebody ends up halfway around the world in the wrong position, and if they're old or young, that's not good for them, right? So, why do we use the term innocent mistake? Why did it even come to be, right? I think some people may not even have heard the term. I don't think in science they use the term. In medicine, we don't use the term. Where do they use the term, right? I think a lot of it is about taking responsibility, right? If something's intentional, then you take responsibility. But something's not intentional, then you don't, right? Even if you did it. For example, in Japan, they're well known for being risk averse, as in people don't want to try new things, as in directors don't want to try new things, so they don't want a black mark. They want to try a new venture because they might fail. That's a black mark. Black marks are bad, right? You can have a string of good marks, but one black one erases all, which is true in many, many people's minds. And so the question is, what do you do then, right? You just don't do stuff. But if you don't do stuff, right? If you don't react when a competitor is doing something, you're still doing something. You're not doing anything. That's doing something, right? And so that's, I'd say, the whole concept of mistake, right? So because you intentionally did something, because you committed an action versus you didn't commit an action, and some result happened, doesn't mean that you're not responsible in both cases. Doesn't mean that your action would have changed the outcome in both cases. And that's where the issue with this concept of innocent mistake comes in. Really, mistakes should be classified on their effect. There's a lot of government mistakes that have huge, wide-ranging effects that menial laborers, if you could say government employees are, made. Like, for example, arresting people in rental cars. Hertz is the rental car agency well known for doing that, so many of their cars are reported stolen. People are actually driving them because Hertz still rents them out. And then the police, with their license plate scanner, see a stolen car and come up, pull over the guy with their guns drawn. Freaks out people who may be with their children, right? Think about airlines. Airlines make mistakes all the time. You can't read people's intentions. You can't read people's minds. And often flight attendants don't bother asking. I think they're better in other countries because, they talk to people. It's like how police in other countries talk to people. In China, they don't have weapons. You try to talk the guy down, right? US, just pull your gun, tell the guy to do what you want him to do. Otherwise, you'll shoot him, basically. So there's a lot of people who have been accused of this or that falsely because the flight attendant made an assumption. Is that an innocent mistake? I would say not. It causes extreme consequences in their lives. I don't care what intention the person had. I care about the consequence, right? And that's the thing with our world today. It's almost like there's two worlds I live in. One in the hospital where there's consequences for your actions and people are aware. And the rest of the world, there's no consequences. And if there's something happened, it's not your fault anyways, right? It's somebody else. It's a system, blah, 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 right? And I feel that's the thing about work and non-work, right? And maybe because I work in the medical field in a hospital, it's just more stressful and demanding. But it's like the rest of workplaces seem to be the same way anymore. It doesn't matter who does what or doesn't do what. And it's like, isn't that way everywhere? Right? I don't know. But the concept of cause and effect, I've always thought maybe it's not true. But for human beings, right, do we need to blame somebody for stuff? There's this big push. Society still has it, even with a kinder, better society, supposedly. But there's a big push to blame somebody for something. And in engineering, we discovered very early on that many things happen and we're not really sure why they happen. They're like once in a million, but they happen. In the computer, with so many different things going on at once, who knows what could happen, and sometimes things happen. And there's no one person at fault. We just simply say nobody's at fault. But in society, they can't accept it, right? Can't be a freak constellation of bad things. So what do we do in society? We find someone to blame. But then yet we have another field, but we don't say it's your fault, right? In the medical field, it's coming over where like, oh, it's everybody's fault, right? But oftentimes it's not. There's things we could do to improve it, right? Like a nurse giving a wrong medication. But to say it's everybody's fault, I think that's a stretch, right? Or a doctor made a mistake. Yes, somebody else was bugging the doctor. He had too much stuff on his plate. But he still made a mistake. That's just that, right? And I think at least for doctors, most of us would say, yeah, that's just the case, right? The buck stops with me. And I think one thing is realizing how much of an effect your actions could have, right? There's many government employees who are menial, little people, right? And I think their work doesn't matter. And they probably don't even know if their work imprisoned somebody wrongly because they typed something incorrectly or off by one number. Forgot to process that application for insurance, and the person was hospitalized the next day and now owes $1 million. Mistakes. There's no innocent. Mistakes have consequences. You can classify them based on their consequence. Bad mistake, small mistake, mistake that caused no harm. But mistakes happen. People make mistakes. That's life. And I think we should learn to live with it, deal with it, and improve on it. The first point starting is, don't say there's such thing as an innocent mistake.